And he's saying to us, look, I am the originator. I am the owner. I am over it all. And he says, and I want to employ you. I want you to be my manager, my steward, to come alongside me and help me manage this right now while you're in this time. Of course, the thing we have to watch out for is that we don't want to ever get to the place where we forget that we're managers and not owners. And that's what David is alluding to in his prayer, saying that you are over all things. You are the ruler over all things. I'm honored that you have allowed me to become your steward to help you manage your resources on earth. We can save ourselves a whole lot of headache and heartache when we remember that God originated all things, God owns all things, God is over all things. Let's be honest. I even find myself saying, my house, my car, my bank account, my church. But we can live a less stressful life when we realize that all these things belong to the Lord. Yes. And there is a great blessing in seeing God as owner. For when the car doesn't work for you, you can just say, Lord, this is your car. I don't know what to do with this thing. This is your car. Everything belongs to him. The late, great John Wesley, John Wesley's house burned to the ground one day. And some people found him and said, John, we're so sorry to tell you, but your house is just burned to the ground. John Wesley said, that's impossible. No, John, your house has burned to the ground. That's impossible, John said. John, we saw it with our own eyes. Your house is gone. That's impossible. You see, I don't own a house. God gave me the place to live in. And I'm only the manager of the house. And if he didn't put out the fire, then that's his problem. John finished replying, he would just have to give me somewhere else to stay. You see, John understood. He understood that he could have something and use something without possessing it or without having it possess him. He didn't hold on to it so tightly that when it went down, he went down too. Some of us can lose our minds if we lost our homes or if we lost our cars. We possess nothing. Why? Because God owns it all. We've seen God's partnership in stewardship. We've seen God's partnership in ownership and possession. But what is our role? Our responsibility as stewards and managers of what belongs to God. There are three things that we need to know and accept as stewards of God's money and resources and blessings in our lives. And the first thing we need to know and accept is, since God owns everything, we don't own anything. And you say, well, you shouldn't have said it like that. But if I didn't say it like that, you wouldn't get it. You know, there cannot be two owners. There's only one owner. If God owns everything, then we don't own anything. 1 Chronicles 29:12 says, both riches and honor come from you. Verse 14 says, all things come from you. So if all we have comes from God, then we're just stewards of God's resources, God's blessings, God's job, God's company, God's career, God's cash, God's crib. We're stewards of God's money, God's mansion. We're stewards of God's house, God's investment, God's retirement fund. Don't you know that you can have all the money stored up in your investments, your retirement, and never be able to enjoy it? God can allow you to die before you get to enjoy it, and he can give it to someone else to enjoy. There is no guarantee that you're going to make it to retirement. So use what God has given you wisely. Why? Because you're just stewards and managers of what God has allowed you to have. Jesus spoke about God's ownership and stewardship in Luke 12:16. He said, the ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no room to restore my crops, or to store my crops? So he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take, eat, ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him that very night, fool, you fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasures for himself and not rich toward God. He was not a good steward of God's bountiful blessings. And what does the Bible say about stewards? 1 Corinthians 4:2 says, it is required in stewards that one be found faithful. Matthew 25:21 says, the Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of the Lord. Do you see it? If God owns everything, we don't own anything. But what are we doing with the stuff that he's giving us? We're just managing it. David even said in his prayer in verse 14, for all things come from you, and of your own we have given you. Whatever we have comes from God, and God owns it all. And one day we're going to have to give an account. Which leads me to the second corollary. Since God owns everything and we don't own anything, number two, God gives us what we have and makes us responsible for it. God gives us what we have and he holds us accountable for it. 1 Chronicles 29:14 and 15 says, ours, it says, of your own have we given you. What was David saying? David was saying, I gave an offering for the temple, but it really wasn't from me. It was just out of the money that you entrusted to me. When I give to God out of what is entrusted to me, in a sense, I'm giving my own money, but on another sense, I'm not. I'm just giving back to God some of what he has entrusted to me to manage on his behalf. Say yeah, somebody. And so ask your neighbor, what kind of manager are you? Y'all kind of weak on that. Well, ask your neighbor this. Can God trust you with his stuff? You see, Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey has a whole lot of God's stuff. Material wealth. But the question is, are they managing what they have according to God's purpose and God's plan? And one day, they will have to give an account. You and I may not have as much with our honest and hardworking 9 to 5, but whatever God has blessed us with, we have to answer that question. Are we managing whatever God has given to us according to God's purpose?